Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about Mew VMAX and the complete guide. I decided that maybe each new deck and an archetype needs a skeleton. How do we get there? What are the building blocks? How do we piece together cards? How do we want to include the 60 cards that we want to bring to a tournament? And today I'm going to give you guys an example using the Mew VMAX archetype. One of the more popular archetypes that's been around since the Fusion Strike set has dropped. And today I'm going to show you guys how to, take the pieces, figure out what you want to do, what's the scariest part of playing Mew, and a couple of important matchups heading into this new rotation with Scarlet and Violet. If you guys enjoy this kind of content, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments below if this is something that interests you, because it does take some time for me to do and I really like doing it. So thank you for checking it out and let's jump right into it. What is Mew VMAX? Now Mew VMAX came with these two wonderful cards in the Fusion Strike expansion. Mew VMAX. A VMAX is a 3-prize Pokemon that has, 2 attacks. Now Mew happens with 310 HP. It's a Psychic type. And it has for double colorless energy, so 2 colorless, Cross Fusion Strike, which chooses one of your benched Fusion Strike Pokemon's attacks and uses it as its attack. And then it has Max Miracle for 2 Psychics, which is 130, and its attack's damage is not affected by any effects on your opponent's active. It is, however, weak to Dark ×2 and resistant to Fighting by 3. Sports a 0 retreat cost, which makes it kind of easy to switch around and move into the active. We have Genesect, the main driver behind the deck. Genesect is also a Fusion Strike Pokemon, as you can see by the tag in the top right of the card indicating Fusion Strike. It's a 190 HP basic Pokemon that is Metal type with the ability Fusion Strike System. Once during your turn, you may draw cards until you have as many cards in your hand as you have Fusion Strike Pokemon. This is not limited to once per turn. This is limited to once per Genesect during your turn. So every single turn, you're going to be able to use multiple Genesects to refill your hand to up to 6 cards and continue to play those cards and keep filling your hand and keep making plays. It's a lot. It can do a lot of things in one turn. Now Genesect has an attack for 2 metals and a colorless Technoblast, which does 210 damage, and this Pokemon can't attack during the next turn. Genesect does have 2 retreat, which is the only relevant part because the weakness and resistance don't really matter. It does give up 2 prizes, but it gives Mew a really good attack to copy because it does a ton of damage. Double Turbo Energy is in this format that says minus 20 damage, but 190 damage is enough with 1 Power Tablet or a modifier to knock out a lot of basic V Pokemon. So Mew can put the aggression on as soon as turn 2, especially if they go first. Now here is a skeleton or building blocks of Mew. I think when you're looking at Mew, you have to think about what cards are always in inclusion. And at the current moment, this is what I would consider a staple build. These cards are cards you need to be in your Mew VMAX deck, or you kind of can't play the game. Now you're going to note, hey, maybe I want to play more than 2 Lost Vacuum. Maybe I want to play more than 2 Choice Belt. Sure, that's where those extra card slots come in that you want to decide and determine as you're moving forward with your build. I think you have to play 4 copies of Genesect and a 4/3 Mew VMAX line. Pokemon recovery has gotten much slimmer. And well, it's your main engine. Mew, Genesect, they're both fine starters. They draw you cards, they get you going, the deck works by itself. 2 copies of Boss's Orders to kind of gust up Pokemon and to a lot of damage. 2 copies of Judge to just disrupt your opponents, and it's just an overall very good card when you're putting your opponent to 4 cards while going to 4 yourself, getting rid of a little bit of a clogged hand, and using Genesect to continue drawing cards and filling your hand up to 6. Not too bad of a downside, if I say so myself. 4 copies of Battle VIP Pass, which really makes the deck something special, because Battle VIP Pass lets you get 2 basic Pokemon and put them on your bench on your first turn, and that's going to basically fill up your board with Genesects and Mews and just get the ball rolling. Cramomatic is a card that lets you flip a coin of heads, discarding an item, and you can get any card from your deck, which gives Mew that little bit of a high roll potential that at any point in time during the game, you can find whatever you want, which is really scary. 4 Power Tablets, which boost the damage of a Fusion Strike Pokemon by 30, which is your damage modifiers. That's how you're going to take those big KOs on big, scary Pokemon, one-shots galore, etc., etc. Ultra Ball is a great card because it's going to find all of your pieces for you, as well as discard 2 cards from your hand, letting you draw some more cards with Genesect. Works out perfectly. Forest Seal Stone is absolutely fantastic because Mew VMAX does not have a V-Star attack or power they can only use once per game, so Forest Seal Stone will give you that easy get-out-of-jail-free card to even start the game. Maybe your opening hand isn't great. Forest Seal Stone, get a VIP Pass. Maybe it's the end of the game. You want to find your double turbo to keep attacking. Forest Seal Stone, it's in your hand. Maybe you need to bump a Path to the Peak and go get that Vacuum. 2 Vacuum seems to be the staple because Path to the Peak is very prevalent, and, well, Mew doesn't really want to play a lot of different stadiums because it's a path enjoyer itself, and I'll explain that in a second. 2 copies of Switch and 1 copy of Rope is the switching cards that the deck usually plays. Now Switch can be replaced with Switching Cart, and Choice Belt can also be in or out of the deck, but I think one is pretty necessary. Featherball and Nestball are making their way into the deck to find those, become better search cards as you're looking for cards. Featherball finds your entire Mew VMAX line, and Nestball finds your Genesects as well as the Mew Vs. You can play more copies than one, but I think one of each feels pretty reasonable. 3 copies of Double Turbo is kind of the bare minimum. The Double Turbo build sports 4, whereas the Fusion Strike build only sports 3. It's probably the best energy in the deck, and it is something you need to just attach to your Mew VMAX, and you're swinging off to the races. There are 2 flavors of Mew. There's the Fusion Strike build, which uses Alessa's Sparkle, Meloetta, Deoxys, and Pokemon Catchers, and cards like that to just have an aggressive tendency, put a lot of pressure onto your opponent with these single prizers that can attack as soon as you go on the first turn, going second even. And a lot of the time, if you can get the right Pokemon knocked out, you can put a lot of pressure on your opponents and just sweep the game from there. The DTE version, however, opts to play a little bit of a slower game, knowing that even if they go second, they can't attack on their first turn, but by the second turn, they can use cards like Path to the Peak, heavier disruption cards like Fan of Waves, Echoing Horn, and those extra slots from those Fusion Strike cards go into things like Roxanne, heavier copies of Judge, playing from behind, being able to close out those games. Now, there's something that Mew is very, very scared of. These are the Fear Factor cards. These are the cards that players are going to play to beat Mew VMAX. If you read Drapion V with its Wild Style ability, this Pokemon's attack costs 1 less colors for each of your opponent's Single Strike, Rapid Strike, and Fusion Strike Pokemon in play. And it does 190. That's not good, because as a Fusion Strike player, or a Mew VMAX player, you can't avoid putting stuff down on your board. You really can't. And that's where it gets kind of scary. So you need to be able to build up your board while dodging Drapion. That's where Path to the Peak of your own comes in handy as a Mew player, because you can put down a Path to the Peak and negate the Wild Style ability, or you can play a Lost City and knock out the Drapion, removing it from the game, because oftentimes decks don't play more than 1 copy. However, this gets a lot scarier if they pair it with Sky Seal Stone, which has a Star Order ability for that turn. If your active basic V Pokemon knocks out a VMAX or a V Star, it takes 1 extra prize. Now, Mew being a Pokemon, Mew VMAX being a card that gives up 3 prizes already, if it gets knocked out by a Drapion V and Sky Seal Stone, you're giving up 4 prizes in 1 turn, and all of a sudden, well, the game is just 1 boss on a Genesect away from being over, which is really scary. And Path to the Peak, even though Mew decks play it pretty prevalently, other decks will also play it to stop you from drawing your cards early, using your abilities, and kind of inhibit your setup as well, which is where the Lost Vacuum count comes in. Despite all 3 of these cards being as prevalent as they are, Mew is still one of the most powerful decks in the format, and let me show you guys some examples of lists. Here is an example of a Fusion Strike list, sporting 2 copies of Meloetta, using Alessa's Sparkle, Trekking Shoes to dig a little bit deeper into the deck, Fog Crystal to find all of your Psychic-type Pokemon, and another burnable search card. You want to have burnable cards. Playing a little bit of weird counts of things like Cramomatic, but we don't really need to talk about that too much. You can just always up that to 4. And then you have Fusion Strike Energy, and Meloetta does 70 times for each Fusion Strike Energy attached to your board, so you can max at 280 with Choice Belts and Power Tablets. You can keep going higher and higher. Here's a version that is also Fusion Strike, sporting Deoxys, which has Photon Boost for 80 plus 80 for if this Pokemon has a Fusion Strike Energy attached to it, and it doesn't get knocked out by things like Cramorant, which are a little bit pesky. This deck plays a copy of Lost City to kind of get rid of some of the annoying attackers that your opponent might have, as well as Collapsed Stadium to bump and heal maybe one of your own guys, playing more copies of Forest Seal Stone to kind of close out the game, and using cards like Hisuian and Heavy Ball to find some of those prized pieces in case that one of Meloetta is prized, or if one of your 3 Mew VMAXs or Vs is prized, to grab them out of the prizes. Also playing Switch cards over Switch, which is like a stylistic choice, I think, for a lot of people. And then we have the DTE version. You can see here with the 3 Path to the Peak and the 4 Vacuum, the deck heavily capitalizes on using Judge and Path to the Peak to slow your opponents down while you're taking your own knockouts. This version plays copies of Cross Switcher, which if you play both at the same time, you can bring up one of your opponent's bench Pokemon as well as switch one of your bench Pokemon to the active. And so it focuses on using a lot of disruption cards and having big swing turns. Cards like Avery to make your opponent discard their bench, making it a little bit awkward during their setup phase. With 2 copies of Nestball and a copy of Featherball to find those pieces easily. 3 copies of Forest Seal Stone to get out of your own Path to the Peak. Just pieces to keep the game going. So now that I've explained to you how Mew VMAX deck works and how it's built, let's talk about some matchups. Lost Box. This is going to be the biggest deck in the new format that you have to deal with. Lost Box is really scary because it's able to find Drapion Sky Seal Stone. However, without the inclusion of Scoop Up Net, the Lost Box is very prevalent to judge. Now, as a Mew VMAX deck, you want to be able to use Psychic Leap and keep putting your VMAXs back into the deck and not giving your opponent an opportunity to take that 3 prize turn with Drapion. If they ever open something like a Raikou V or have to go into a Drapion preemptively, maybe you can Lost State of the Drapion and Roxanne in the same turn. That could set them back a couple turns. If you can keep successfully putting your Mews back into the deck and Psychic Leaping, you can put a lot of pressure onto your opponents. Pokemon Recovery isn't easy anymore. It's only 2 copies of Clara, as you can see in this list. So that is your win condition. You're going to be able to put a lot of pressure on early, take those quick, cheap prizes, bounce back your Mew VMAXs into the deck with Psychic Leap and using Power Tablets to get that extra damage to one-shot things like Comfey, Sableye. Maybe not the other guys. The other guys are a little bit bigger. But that is how you can win this matchup. It's definitely a very winnable matchup, as Mew has proven time and time again, but it is probably one of the scariest matchups because of the combination of Drapion V and Sky Seal Stone. Next up, we have Gardevoir, one of the bigger decks coming out of the new format that a lot of people are talking about, and they really, really like. Why is Gardevoir so good? Well, Refinement, Psychic Embrace, all that good stuff. But the scariest thing about Gardevoir is they can one-shot you. They can get a lot of energies onto the board and one-shot your Mew VMAX and end the game realistically in 2 attacks. Just like the other matchup, you do want to be judging. Judge plus Path is probably one of your best outs into this matchup because Gardevoir can't use its ability under Path. Gardevoir EX, sorry. Zacian V can't either. And, well, if you can stop them from getting energy into the discard by stopping that Greninja from using concealed cards, taking early knockouts, Psychic Leaping as well on Brawlstas and Kirlias if you need to, you're in a good spot. If you choose to play a card like Oricorio to do -20 as well, it can put you in a much better position to force your opponents to have that extra energy to do a lot of damage. This deck also has a copy of Sky Seal Stone, so if they can get one big Zacian going with a Sky Seal Stone, it could be really, really scary. However, I think you are the better deck, and you can always outpace them in the game. Finally, I wanted to talk about Arceus variants. Arceus Giratina is one that's becoming very much popular, or very, very popular. I don't know why I said much, but it's becoming very, very popular, sporting the copies of the barrel to draw cards, so you can't really judge them out of the game. But it is a 2-prize deck primarily. It does have the copy of Drapion, but no copy of Sky Seal Stone, because Starbirth is just better. You want a Starbirth every time with this deck. It uses this Judge plus Path strategy that, should look a little bit familiar. We're also doing that a little bit ourselves. But at the end of the day, this matchup should be very, very easy if we go first. If you go first, you always take 2 prizes on their Arceus. You can put the pressure on immediately, and they have to respond quick. If they don't have another Arceus in play or another Starbirth ability, they can't really find their cards. Their draw supporters are 4 Colossus Experiment and 3 Judge, which isn't a lot. You can always put a ton of pressure on them with your own Path to the Peak early, making it so they can't use their Arceuses or Starbirth specifically. They're going to have to find those pieces like Drapion under Path to the Peak. They're going to have to find those pieces while being judged consistently. And I think a late game Roxanne really could do them in if they don't set up their barrel. These are some of the matchups that I wanted to talk to you guys about today. And this was your Mew VMAX guide. If you guys enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe like I asked earlier. And let me know in the comments how I can improve this or what other decks you want to see next. Thank you guys so much. Peace out.